All right, welcome everyone. Good to see everyone's faces for our final wrap-up session. We just kind of wanted to start with, if anyone's having questions, especially with knobs and buttons of Voce Vista, if something got stuck, you're stuck on a view, or anything at all. If you want to just toss some stuff out.
I wanted to solve the nature of mental functioning. So
yeah, we can start that now. Yeah. Annie asked a question this week that I want to share with everyone because that something we'll probably all share. Does anyone else have just...
Why don't you start there while they think about it?
Okay. So the question we had about just a view on Voce Vista. One moment.
Just bring it up here. Drink. And then, sorry. I ruined everything. You had it covered.
I have got it covered.
Mm-hmm. But now I'm doing it. So.
Great. Okay, so you can see Voce Vista now. Was on the settings wheel, if you go to scale and you click the linear view, you'll notice that the keyboard gets super funky looking. And this is a way to look at it, like actually the way the harmonics are spaced, right? They're like, in the lower octaves, they're much closer together. So the first one's 100 hertz, the next one's 200 hertz, so they're all crunched together, versus in the upper octave, they get way more spread out. So the linear view is attempting to, make it look like actual reality, but it's not necessarily, we don't find it to be a stunning visual. So if this happens to you...
Ingo Tietze loves this visual.
That's true. So logarithmic is what you'd want if you want it to look like an actual, the keyboard and the staff that we recognize. But yes, you have those choices with that menu.
And it may get stuck there.
Yeah.
I think, don't want to spend time looking there, but I think there's a way to get there without going to the settings menu, but do the settings, that's easy.
Yeah.
Any other questions that came up with anyone? You want to unmute and throw it out there?
Does anyone's piano ever not make sound?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
In fact, that happens often. It's a bug in the program somehow. So if that happens, I think you saw us do it 2 weeks ago. Just close out of the software and reopen it. Yeah. And it may just be with Macs. I don't know if because Mac is the newer one.
Can I ask a question about the display at the bottom on the timeline in seconds?
Sure.
Sometimes mine doesn't look the same as yours. How do you change how that looks?
Can you describe what yours looks like?
I don't have the program
open
right now in front of me, so and because yours doesn't have anything, I can't remember how to differentiate between what I had.
Mm-hmm.
So yours looks like a sound wave, but mine didn't look like a sound wave.
Okay. So this is actually, Angie, a wonderful, just kind of general question. So when you're troubleshooting, the first place I always go is the view, because so many of the options sit there. For example, you may have the waveform open, which is a different thing that's up here. Somebody may see that. We don't use that. It's a editing tool mostly. Sorry. Why isn't it saving? Hold on just a second. Oh, because I'm not. Stop. Okay. I'm trying to think about not knowing what you're looking at. It's hard to say.
It's okay. Don't worry about it.
One of these guys may be clicked or unclicked, or then the other place I look is over here in the options, because a lot of the visuals are controlled here. So the analyzer view, you can change the colors, you can change a lot of the way these things look. You may have a different color map. I don't know exactly what you're looking at, but if you're looking for something specific and can send us a screenshot, we can kind of puzzle it out. But just knowing those are two places that I go to. And you can also play with these presettings, but don't do that now.
I want to do it for ours.
Yeah.
But over here, I clicked on setting profiles, and you could just go back to factory settings if you wanted a restart moment.
Those can be fairly heavy-handed. So give yourself a moment when you're not trying to teach to play with those if you want to see the difference.
Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Anybody else?
I do, but also I think regarding the view at the bottom to see the waveform and the timeline, I think it's just timeline has to be clicked. I just kind of played around with that and unclicked timeline, and that completely took it away. So maybe that's
Yeah, maybe that's what you're saying, Angie. Yeah.
Timeline.
My question was, when you're playing with the vowel chart, I noticed when you guys, I guess you click on it, it actually makes a sound of a vowel.
Yes.
Is anybody else not hearing that?
That's
Like,
so.
Yeah.
Yours isn't doing that?
No.
Have you tried restarting the program? And I mean, it's not doing it right this second.
But
Is it making any sound? Like, will it play the keyboard or play back? Oh, okay. So it sounds like
just restarting it.
GoToVista is just not connecting to your speakers or not communicating.
Yeah, I think earlier on you had trouble maybe with your settings too. So you might check in the settings menu. You might check the audio
playback
and see what the output device is. That may be something. If you're not getting those kinds of either the keyboard or the vowel chart or just hearing any playback at all, check that out. And it, your settings on your actual device, so in Macs would be system preferences, that can have an impact as well. Those things should generally function. So again, these are the places we go to troubleshoot: the settings wheel and the view menu mostly. And just a reminder, once the vowel chart lines are up there, they tend to stay. I haven't asked Bodo about that, so we just create a new file. And they go away.
I had a question. A couple times I put up filter boxes, and I was trying to show a student, how basically what's going on, and I was trying to turn one vowel into another by increasing the volume in the filter box. A few times the volume slider was not responsive. What I thought it was when the filter box is in all the dense colors, it's sometimes a little hard to peek and poke around with my eyes. But where I thought the volume slider was on the filter box to increase the density of it, it wasn't happening.
Sometimes it reverses. So
what it's supposed to do is get louder as it goes to the right and get softer as it goes to the left.
When it's really loud already, the visuals are really hard. They get cloudy, like right around there. It's like, which one's, and the one left by the red minus, what is that one?
Over here?
Right to the right. There's one little slider to the right.
Oh, this?
Yeah, isn't that a horizontal slider? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It's just going to move the box.
No, look, he's right.
There's a horizontal one. That one I always mistake visually for.
It's just that's just the edge of the thing. So it would be like it just moves it all the way over there. That's all it is.
I think there's only one slider, and those are the edges of its capacity.
Well, maybe my volume wasn't responsive because I was definitely moving a slider, but nothing was changing.
Yeah, and like Laurel said, every now and again this will get flipped, and when you go left, it'll get louder. Same kind of thing. Just restart VSW. That's there's still a couple of bugs, especially in the Mac, but they show up randomly, and we just restart.
But I would use this other view over here. Just if you're having trouble being like, which one's louder, which one's the strongest, because it gives you that visual as well. If the color isn't enough.
It's Pinocchio.
Yeah. So that tells you it's getting stronger, and now.
Well, no, I was able. I knew what to look for, but it wasn't responsive at all.
Yeah.
Oh, weird. Okay.
Yeah, I we weren't responding to what you were saying because the answer is I have no idea. Just restart it and see if that makes a difference.
Yeah, and then if not, with all of these, if there's a continual problem, definitely email Bodo. We'll send out his email in our kind of wrap-up email. He's super responsive, and
everybody bother Bodo.
Yeah, but I mean, this is his baby, and he's a real person who is super reasonable and wants to help, and knows a lot about it.
Did you have a last question before we go? Go ahead, Cora.
Sure. I should know this, but when you have a filter box up, what was the button to just have it there but nullify it so you see everything? Because obviously plus is reverse, filter. And then what is the one, is it the check mark? If I just wanted to have everything available, but still have the filter box?
Yes, check mark.
Well, thank you, that's all.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, well, we can get to some more at the end, or keep chatting through email as the questions come up. But today, we wanted to look back over the goals we've had for the course, and then we're going to talk about a couple new ideas, and then just kind of wrap some pretty bows on all these concepts that we've been playing with. So a reminder, our goals for this crash course was that you could feel confident asking you questions and confident where to seek those answers.
Understanding VSW as a tool, feeling sufficient in using it regularly.
Just engage with some basics in voice science, anatomy, acoustics, the way we learn and process sound, and then how to share those concepts with someone else in language that works for you and that's, you know, quick and fast. We're talking about normal voice lesson length. And
understanding different approaches to the voice using voice science, such that we can move away from the having to think about things and integrating our learning into the body-mind system.
So, wrapping up some concepts with some pretty bows for now. Of course, there's always ... Wait a minute, what about this? Which is the exciting part. Playing with some more ideas about formants now that we're really settling into what they are and how to look at them and what they do for our sound. Getting a deeper understanding of inertance or acoustic support. And then we're going to play with SOVTs. If you have a straw or even a paper cup nearby, we're going to play with those. And we want to invite you to our next course. It's our 3-week tech dive. And we're going to look at 3 new softwares that help us play with the voice. We're going to look at Mata, which is a free download, and it's a voice synthesizer. So it actually is creating an artificial voice, and then you get to play with all the factors and use it as a model, use it as a way to really break down, oh yeah, what is going on in sound to create the different sounds that I'm going for. And then we're going to look at Vox and Silica, which is Ingo Tietz's creation with other engineers. And it's brand new, it's for PAVA members, but it's really the only software that does what it does, because it creates a visual of the vocal folds. So you put in all these parameters and you get to see, oh, that's what would happen at the level of the vocal folds. Oh, that's what the vocal tract would do. And it's also voice synthesizers, and it creates voice on its own. And then a bonus topic for this course is we're going to talk about how to communicate with sound engineers about EQing and miking based on this research in psychoacoustics. So that's in November. We're going to send out info tomorrow and hope you can join us. We also want to offer you a discount in the next week if you can sign up and do that with us. So, what you said so far?
Yeah, this next few minutes is, again, a little review to help us focus on what we're bringing today. So we just looked at VSW, the benefits of the visual, what the voice looks like. Yesterday with my children's choir, I showed them, the harmonic game where we just filter one harmonic and then had them make some sounds and talked about the differences in how it looked. And they were just, totally gaga. And they were 4th graders to 10th graders, and they, brought something out of it just because of that visual. There's awakening the listening, either through casual listening or focused listening, like we were talking about with Corel at the beginning. And there's helping people realize the finite changes between styles that we talked about last week. So not a whole lot shifted, but a whole lot seemed to have shifted. So if we can see it, we can see, these subtle adjustments are going to make the big difference. And then focused imitation. So bringing out very specific elements of the sound, training the ear through our own sound, or by focusing on the essential parts.
And just the process is listening to the filtered sound. So like we did last time, filtering your own sound to get towards your goal based on what we know about the style, or just looking at someone else's sound in the analyzer, listening to it, starting to sing along with it, and then singing along without it. And just that simple process, people can make those changes. And maybe you experienced that this week as well.
Yeah, and I think hearing these concepts, saying them to yourself over and over again, I mean, I'm doing this all the time for myself, because helping us refocus on a new way of thinking, new questions we can ask, this kind of thing. To review the Tomatis effect, one is that, these are the three kind of key points for voice use. One is that the voice is able to reproduce only the frequencies that the ear can perceive. So we get to differentiating and filter boxing. Two, if listening is modified, the voice is also immediately and unconsciously modified, which means that once the ear can hear it, the voice will do it. And three, when auditory stimulation is maintained over a length of time, phonation undergoes lasting modification, which means that the voice will continue to do it if we have asked it to. And the cool thing about this too, you think about, this is a slight extension, but when you think about training for different styles or different ways of using your voice, you want to add this tool to your toolbox. The body's going to undergo lasting modification in one way of singing with one tool. When you add another tool, it's not that you're always going to go to that new tool. You now have two tools to go with, because that's the beauty of the conscious mind. You say, hey, I want this tool to work now, and the body will figure it out. So that's exciting. We talked about the beauty of differentiation. Once you can hear it, your body will bring it out. And the difference, yeah, I'll just go on. We talked about,
yeah, and then in our first session, we reviewed that the effect that the vocal folds have on the harmonics that we produce, because they're the source of the sound. If they're not creating the harmonics that we want to work with, we can't make up for that later. We can only amplify the ones that the vocal folds create. So, a simple cheat sheet, if the vocal folds are more open, there's more air escaping through them, we end up hearing less upper harmonics. Those upper harmonics are softer. If the vocal folds are more together, more adducted, more focused, we get much stronger upper harmonics to a point, because if they're forced together too much, the sound actually will stop. If there's more stretch in the vocal folds, so they're more thinned out, that vibrating more on their edges, we will hear less upper harmonics in the sound. And this becomes necessary the higher we go in our range. And then if the vocal folds are more thick, more bulk of them is vibrating, we'll once again get more stronger upper harmonics in the sound.
And just to note that these conversations, we really try and put a fine point on it. Of course, it's all more complicated, but with this particular discussion, if you want to dig a little more deep into it, we just published a new page on our website called Registers ? Vocal registers, and it gets more into the interaction of the relationship of these muscles. And there are several articles you can follow on that are really interesting about these relationships. This is our how do you talk to the person who doesn't know any of this.
Yeah, and then how do we bring it back to sound? Because as we said, we don't hear muscles, we hear harmonics. Yeah. And so, but we can make some deductions like, wow, I'm hearing, there's just none of that ring in the sound, none of those upper harmonics. Let's do an exercise that'll help bring the vocal folds together. That will get us there, that kind of logic thought. And then talking about formants, our next part of the equation. Formants are like, we describe them as the pitch of the air in our vocal tract, because our vocal tract is these containers of air. And we can change that pitch of the air with our articulators, with our tongue, our jaw, our larynx, our lips. And the cheat sheet version again is that if we make all those changes and we get a smaller container of air with a wider opening, we will get a higher pitch of the air. And if we get a larger container of air with a smaller opening, we will get a lower pitch of the air. And that interacts with our harmonics in a crucial way. Which leads us to our resonance strategies, which is all about our choice. So by adjusting those parts of our vocal tract to change the pitch of the air, we end up bringing out different harmonics in the sound. So with vowel shape, with physical jaw dropping, tongue forwarding, we end up shifting which harmonic we bring out. And last time we talked about those first few harmonics. So is the pitch of the air in my throat, my first formant area, is it boosting the first harmonic? Is it boosting the second harmonic? Is it boosting somewhere in between? And we saw and listened to how each of those just tiny shifts makes it sound like we're in a whole different genre and a whole different style of singing, feels completely different to the singer. And so these are the choices we have, or strategies we have for resonance. They're all resonant. They're all resounding something, but just depending on which part we resound, we end up with a choice for musical theater, opera, belting, etc.
And we talked about 3 resonant strategies that that we kind of start with. One is whoop, one is hey, one is acoustic mix. And so a whoop resonant strategy, your first formant, or the pitch of the air in the throat, couples with the first harmonic, which encourages the vocal folds to move to a more ligament dominant position, or where they're on their edges. And
Stretched out. Yeah.
Stretched out. And all of this is going to create fewer high harmonics and really intense energy in the first harmonic.
And have that woo, whoopee. Sorry, it's so hard to teach a voice class and your voice is scratchy. I know.
So so we get that whoop. A lot of people may call it head voice, and you get it saying yoo-hoo or doing a siren, this kind of thing. We hear it especially in female voices in Western classical singing, a lot in choral singing as well, in lots of voice parts, depending on where you are in the range. With the hey resonant strategy, we're focused on bringing out the second harmonic or above, and the first formant area, again, the pitch of the air in the throat, couples directly with one of the upper harmonics. And with most voice parts, it's usually just the second or third, but whenever you sing below G3 or so, then you can start to couple with the 4th, 5th, 6th, even 7th and 8th harmonics, depending on how low you go. So again, first formant coupling specifically with an upper harmonic, it gives us, it encourages the vocal folds to go into a more bulky position where there's more muscle mass touching, which is going to increase the energy in all of the harmonics. And people sometimes refer to this as chest voice or belting. Again, if you looking at our article, those are just words that people sometimes use. They also say bright or loud or this kind of stuff. But if we say hey and do that kind of sound, a call, we're likely to achieve this resonant strategy. We do hear this in different forms of pop singing, gospel, music theater, and not as much in Western classical singing. In fact, when somebody's attempting to sing like a tenor aria and they do a lot of this hey resonant strategy, people call it out as being inappropriate. So then the acoustic mix is when the first formant, or the pitch of the air in the throat, sits between 2 harmonics. Often this is the first and second harmonic, but it can also be the second, third, or the third and fourth, even the 4th and 5th, depending on how low you're singing, and which vowel shape you're choosing. When we find this acoustic mix, the vocal folds are more likely to avoid an extreme position. So they're going to not be in a ligament dominant on the edges, and nor will they be in full muscle mass, but they'll be somewhere in the middle. And this acoustic choice encourages that. And again, we call this acoustic mix because you get qualities of both harmonics that are around that first formant. And just to say again, well, and acoustic mix is used in all styles and for different reasons, and different parts of the range. To say again, each of these resonant strategies encourages the vocal folds into a certain posture, but it doesn't mean that the vocal folds have to be in that posture when using this resonant strategy. So you actually have the first step, the vocal folds were encouraged into a certain posture, like with the whoop resonant strategy, they're encouraged to be on their edges. But we've been playing in the choir with the idea of using bird calls as a way to get into these resonant strategies. And we're using the pigeon for the whoop. And so they make the coo sound. But then we've come up with a power pigeon, which is the resonant strategy of the whoop, but with a vocal fold strategy that includes more muscle mass. So you can do you can use the vocal folds in ways that aren't directly triggered by the acoustics. And that's really exciting too, because you start to see variables and how they impact one another.
Right, and these variables, this is why we have so many choices and why a single descriptor of register doesn't really pan out, because, oh, well, the vocal folds could do this, but then my vocal tract is doing this. We just can combine things kind of to infinity, which is exciting. That's the choices we have.
And I think to say too, when you attempt to make a choice where the vocal folds are doing something that the acoustics strategy isn't necessarily supporting, then you have to find other acoustic choices that do support it. And we're going to talk about those in just a second, how to look for options beyond this first formant coupling idea. So all three of these resonance strategies have to do with the first formant and its relationship.
And are a great entryway into getting people to just feel resonance, to feel that they have choices, and to try to trigger the vocal folds to do something we would find desirable.
Yeah. The first formant, just to wrap this up, is the greatest energy peak that we work with, and therefore it's really dominant in people's experience first. So beginning here makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and because it's boosting the first few harmonics, the bottom of the sound, that is one of the most key parts for how we identify the sound also. So the way are we boosting the fundamental? Are we boosting the octave above it? Somewhere in the middle, this just is what triggers us to go, oh my gosh, I recognize that style, versus, oh no, that was definitely not opera. So when we talk about all these ingredients, which we've been doing for the last 4 weeks, this is all there is. There's not like another thing. There's these harmonics from the vocal folds, and then these resonances or these formants that bring out certain of those with the vocal tract. So the vowel shape, which is a complex. And it's from that information that we come up with words like register, head voice, belt. It was forward.
Squeaky, groany, ugly.
Yeah, pretty. I liked it. Anything. But just to know that any word we have to describe the voice, it's not like, oh yeah, and then there's also the vowel, and then there's also the harmonics. Like, that is all there is. There is vowel shape, and really there's just harmonics that we hear, and some are louder than others, and that's based on the vowel shape. So that is the voice. That's it. And then we come up with language on top of that.
And I think this is an important concept to reiterate. We talked about it in the first session, because the way our brains are, the way they work, we get very wedded to language. And what we're hoping to help kind of open the discussion about is that the language itself is several steps removed from our experience. If we can help people come back to the experience of all you got is harmonics, some of them are more boosted than others, then we can help people reshape the language that they choose to say to themselves, which we all know, language that's in our heads can be incredibly debilitating or inspiring. And if we can bring it back to what's actually happening, it can help people create language that is inspiring rather than debilitating. But if they've got a word in their head that's stopping them from hearing what's going on, that will continue to happen until they release that word.
Yeah, and I find just comforting too that it's not, I don't know, it's like there's not like 10 things to worry about. It's like it's just one thing. It's like, I feel like the acoustic conversation we talk so much about vowel, and then it's like, okay, but what register is it in? It's like, no, it's only vowel. Like you heard vowels and then you assigned a register word, but there is no separate conversations. It is all this one aggregate sound. So, and that leads us to kind of translating into how people often describe sound, which is by placement, and where they might tell themselves, this is where I feel the sound, and therefore I know it is a certain sound. So we hear this all the time with, oh, it's really forward. It's, up in the mask. It's in my sinuses. It's buzzing in my face. It's ringing out the top of my head. I put it in my cheekbones. It's out here in front of me. And this language, again, is just a way to describe that when a harmonic from the vocal folds lines up with a frequency or a formant in the vocal tract, that harmonic gets boosted. And that's so incredibly powerful when that happens, that the bones in your head and your skull and your chest and your back and really your whole body vibrate in sympathy. This isn't the same thing as sound actually coming out of your cheekbones, or your sinus is actually being the resonating cavity, your vocal tract is the resonating cavity. But we can use these sensations to track, I know that I have a resonant boosted sound because I'm feeling some buzzing in my face. And this can get us to a point. At some point, we can only make it buzz in our face so much. And then, how do I tell the difference between when I'm buzzing in my face, when I'm belting versus whooping versus opera? In my opinion, it doesn't take us to the full depth of the conversation, but it can certainly be a starting point, especially for someone who's never really experienced resonance.
Yeah, and I would say too about this conversation, because and y'all maybe some of these people, there are people who really rely on sensation as a kind of primary entry point and ongoing. And like Laurel said, we do have sensations. We can feel buzzes. We can, track with that to a point. I think what I've noticed with students of mine who have come from experiences like that, where everything was feel it in the nose, feel it in the head, whatever, is that sensation and the desire to make more of it becomes so dominant that they can't hear anymore. And there's no flexibility to their sound, because that's all they're focused on is, can I feel this pressure point in my forehead? Well, when your sinuses are clogged, for example, you don't feel that pressure point anymore. So that's one easy example of when you're at a loss because you can't feel it because you're clogged. And so to say, allowing these sensations to be one element, or even migratory elements, drawing attention to, just sensory awareness, that's kind of cool. But I would avoid making that the kind of everything. And again, go to things like the analyzer to help guide the ear. And that can be so much more powerful and lasting, because the ear really can pick up on that stuff and is working on the voice without you having to work on it.
Totally. And when we get into nuance, we, like you said, we can't, at some point it can't get even more forward.
Right.
There's not as many degrees of variation.
And it also allows for greater complexity, et cetera, et cetera.
So one more thought on vowel modification. Like when we're talking about, all right, if you want a whoopy sound, you need to create.
Hold on a second. Sorry. I forgot to say this. Just to say clearly, your sinuses do not add to the harmonic output. There's still plenty of people saying that in the world. It's not true. The only thing adding to the harmonic output is the vocal tract and the nose if you lower the soft palate.
Correct. Yes.
So the sinuses are not doing that.
Right. For a resonator to be effective, there has to be a hole. So the chest is also not doing that because there's no hole in the chest to let the sound out. Yeah. Cool.
Sorry.
Had to make that clear. So just one more thought on vowel modification. Vowel is a complex, and our vocal tract has multiple different containers that can boost different parts of the vowel. So when we say to make a whoopy sound, an oo vowel shape, which is a really low frequency, so it's going to boost the first harmonic, you need that in order to make it whoopy. That doesn't mean that you can only ever sing oo. It just means that that first formant area, the pitch of the air behind in the throat, that needs to be ringing around an oo. In the pitch of the air in the mouth, in the container, in the oral cavity, you can have you could have e, you can bring out all kinds of other qualities that would tell us what the word is. So just kind of reminding ourselves again that, it's this complex, and I'm talking about different parts of the sound when I talk about vowel modification. So if someone's saying like, okay, can you put a little more oo in that it's still an with the part of the sound I brought out with my mouth, but maybe I made more space in the throat to bring out more ooh qualities as well. And this gets into a few more things you just want to play with on the formant conversation.
Sorry, I keep
going back. All right, jump on in.
This, if you read Ken Bozeman's second book, he talks about overvowel and undervowel.
Yeah.
And that's language that a number of people we've noticed have started picking up on. It's one way to discuss the difference between the first formant energy peak and the second formant energy peak.
Right. So in that example, the first one, maybe the undervowel was closer to and the overvowel that we heard was but then the undervowel was much more ooh, and the overvowel stayed as and so this is just a way of talking about the vowel quality that the first formant is boosting, and then also the second formant, and knowing that they are separate and that we can listen for both is so key, that it's not just, what do you mean I sung there are many shades of
and with the filter boxes, you can just bring that out for them, and then they can hear the ooh quality, and then their body will adjust.
Yeah, we'll play with that in a second. So 3 ideas we just want to show on the analyzer to wrap up this idea on formants. We'll save them and then we'll go play with them on the analyzer. First one is that formants are an energy peak and not a single location. And this is something take the blame for if that is confusing, because the way we start the conversation with people is by thinking of them at a single location. Just so you can start to wrap your brain around this idea of, pitches of the air, and that created by the throat or the mouth. Got it. Okay.
The bottles of air.
Right. Those are all, that's that entryway conversation, so we can start playing with the information.
And we highly encourage that kind of entryway. We've seen really positive results because this idea of there being a separate pitch, a separate energy peak, a separate boost from the sound that the harmonics are creating, it's just confusing. And so we found assigning a location, giving it a shape like a bottle, these are things that help people start to develop an understanding. But we, as the people guiding them, of course, knowing a little more further down the road, we're not talking about a place as much as we're talking about an energy boost. And that energy boost can be affected by a great many things.
Yeah. And that, we'll look on the analyzer in a second, but it's that you see, the first formant's at 300 hertz. Well, that's the peak. It was also boosting everything coming up to that point, and it peaked at 300 hertz. So that visual is kind of our next step in understanding. We'll look at that in a sec. Second idea we want to look at is that when formants cross a harmonic, this can equal a great instability for the vocal folds. We'll take a look at that in the analyzer.
And particularly the first formant, but all of them.
Yeah, when they, if your formants are going down and your pitch is going up, we can often hear vocal folds go, whoa, what happened? And we'll look at that. And then this last idea we've been really excited about lately, and just the idea of, in our listening, are we trying to make the first formant raise up to do the job of the second formant? Or are we trying to make the second formant raise up and do the job of the upper formants, which we'll talk about today?
And maybe another way to talk about that is to say, we perceive the desire to hear upper harmonics because they speak in a different way. That E quality we're wanting to recreate, especially for certain styles. Well, really all styles want that at some level. So we're hearing that, and our body's responding by narrowing everything, because that's one way to bring out upper harmonics is narrowing. But there's diminishing results in that. So that would be another way of saying the first formant trying to do the job of the upper ones.
Right. And this just seems to be kind of like the number one skill that people learn when they're a quote unquote trained singer, is just to bring out the parts of the sound with the area that does it best. With
least amount of strain.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry.
Let me talk, please. with the area that can do the most efficiently. The first formant can't get as high as second formant, and if it tries, you end up crunching the area around your larynx. So if you're hearing 1,000 hertz and you're trying to bring it out with the area in your throat, you're going to have a much more strained sound than if you can listen in a way that lets your mouth bring it out. And if you're hearing 3,000 hertz and you're trying to bring that out with your mouth and your throat, they'll never get small enough to bring that out. You can only do that with your epilarynx tube that we'll talk about. So kind of this assigning who does what seems to just be crucial, and that has to do with the complexity of how we listen. So let's look at those three things on the analyzer. Okay, so the first one is this idea of energy peaks, not just a location. So by saying, ah, and remember we've got this view going on, and wherever I click over here, it's going to show me these peaks. So we can deduce from this that we've got,
like, first, you all look at it and see where the first formant is in your mind. Where do you think the first formant is sitting in order to create the kinds of harmonic boosts necessary to make the sound that she just created?
Where's the first big boost?
So if you're just looking at on this part, you notice that the darkest line is here. So that's likely where our first formant is. And if you look at this part, you see this is the greatest amplitude. So I think we can agree that's probably where the first formant is. We know it's an ah vowel shape, so we're expecting the second formant to be close by. And so it's probably sitting right around here.
But we could pull out the vowel chart if we wanted to check on that. Like, what? Is that normal for an ah? Okay.
And so she's got her first and second formant kind of clustering here. And that's what we expect to see with the ah.
But, so entryway conversation, we can talk about, oh yeah, the first formant is here, it's located here. But really, where we see the most energy is the peak of the hill. There was a hill of energy going up to there, created by the vocal tract. And this is where it peaked. So everything on the way up is also getting a boost. That's why this guy is strong and this guy is strong. It's not just that the formant is sitting here and nothing else gets affected. It's just that it peaked here with the most energy. And then the second one peaked here and brought along everything with it on the way. Is that how you describe that?
Yeah, and this is a very complex concept, attempting to make it simple, but it also can be really kind of enlightening and refreshing. And so remember also that we talked about the concept of spectral slope. It means that the first harmonic is always going to be louder than the second, which is always going to be louder than the third, which is always going to be louder than the fourth, in a mathematical way. So
without a filter.
Without a filter.
Just vocal folds on their own, that's what would happen.
If we had a spectral slope of -6, the second harmonic would be 6% less loud than the first, and the third would be 6% less loud than the second, etc. Well, so there is this element of this one's already going to be stronger and this one's already going to be stronger. So the very fact that the first formant can make the third harmonic that much stronger, and then the second one is stronger than the first, that's showing you how that energy boost is working. It's working against the spectral slope, if you will. So you can see this buildup, and that's contributing to the quality of the sound, right? That we have 3 harmonics here below the first, or at and below the first formant, that are getting energy. And also, if we look at this, we can kind of guess that Laurel is using a Hay resonant strategy because of the super intensity of this third harmonic. If she was using an acoustic mix strategy, we would look to see either the second harmonic being stronger or the fourth, because that would mean her first formant would either migrate a little higher or a little lower. So the fact that this one is so intense by comparison to the others, we can say she's using a Hay resonant strategy on the third harmonic, which means her first formant is locked into that third harmonic. That's where the energy peak is. Sorry, I should say it this way. The energy peak, which would be the first formant, is located right at the third harmonic. Mm-hmm. And the other thing about the energy peaks is that once it peaks, then there's a valley. So we would expect right after here to see a decrease in energy, and in fact we do. If it weren't for the second formant being close to the fourth harmonic, this information would disappear. But because her second formant is low, I'm sorry, because the second formant is close to the first formant, we have all of this information is important to the sound, because that second formant was able to come down close to the first and bring out more information. That's part of what we look for in an ah sound, is this kind of coupling of the first and second formants that allow for all of these harmonics to be important.
And as we'll talk about when we get to twang, that because these are all, you know, this was a hill and it brought everything with it and it peaked here, and then there's another hill that brought everything with it and peaked here. All those energy peak hills feed into each other. So the stronger the first formant is, that it's going to make the second one even stronger. And the stronger this these upper formant clusters are, which we'll get into, the stronger they're going to make everything. So everything is feeding each other, which is the key to projection, resonance, support, all those words that we look for in efficient voice production.
And just to show an example here, Laura, will you sing on that same pitch? We sing an E.
E.
So we can see, you take a second and see where you see the energy peaks for the E. See where you think the first formant and the second formant are. And if you remember what that sounded like, I'll play the difference in the ah and the E.
Change pitch, but that's irrelevant.
And that E sounds a little, maybe you might say warmer if we compared them, whatever. What I'm seeing here is a slight amount of acoustic mix. It's low, it's close to this first formant, but it's not right on it. It's not a full whoop. You could hear that in the sound, or you could look at the general amplitude difference. So the second harmonic is not as strong as the first, but it's stronger than if she had really locked into that whoop first harmonic. Yeah, do that in fact. You can see the difference in what a whoop would look like versus an acoustic mix. Again, it's close to the whoop, but it's not quite there. So then our second peak is not until way up here. This is her second formant and her third formant kind of clustering together. And you can see over here, we get these three harmonics boosting. That's part of what we expect in the E vowel shape. But I asked her to do this so that we could see this energy peak here that's giving energy to both the first and the second harmonic. And then right after that, in fact, right there, probably where it peaked, we start to see a roll off. So that's why the second harmonic isn't quite as strong. And then we see a sharp roll up after that. So these guys here are basically non-existent in the overall, in comparison to these and these. And that's what we expect in an E vowel shape. So if you wanted to sing in a way that avoided that dip, if you wanted that information, you would have to change your vowel shape away from E somehow in order to bring more energy here. Or like Laura was saying, if we can find ways to boost across the sound, then we can fill in some of that energy as well.
So our second thing to play with, yes, when formants and harmonics cross. So I'm gonna vocal fry so you can see what the formants are doing. Oh yeah, you get to do that, please. David will vocal fry so you can see what the formants are doing. He'll then do a pitch pattern, and we'll see what happens when these two events cross each other.
So an ah and an oo. Ah, ooh. So you can see again the reflection of the energy peak of the first formant here with the ah, and how it drops so low for the oo, and the energy peak of the second formant for the ah drops a little bit for the oo. They're very close together. This is our third formant for the ah, drops a little for the oo, as does the fourth and the fifth. They're all a little less each time. We were mainly focused on the first formant here. So I'm now going to sing low on the ah. So my pitch is going to be down here for the ah, and then I'm going to raise the pitch for the oo. And so what you're going to see is the frequency that I'm singing will cross the formants. Ah, ah, ah. And if we look at that together, So we see here, this is where I started with the ah. My pitch was way down here, but I was bringing out the fifth harmonic. So this would be an example of a Hay resonant strategy on the fifth harmonic. Again, what we were just talking about. Notice the big build up here to that fifth harmonic, right?
Everything on the way up the hill gets a boost as well. It just peaks at the fifth.
Well, then I leapt and went to the oo vowel shape. So notice now I'm above, and notice what happens. All my energy goes into the first harmonic and everything else kind of drops off a little, or quite a bit actually. So the difference between these two is rather stark. And what we're really interested right now is how my first formant went from here to here.
Pitch went up, formants went down.
Mm-hmm.
They crossed on the way.
And if I over exaggerate that, we're going to hear a major vocal break. Right? And you can see the result of that in all of these up and down disturbances. Right? If I were just to highlight that disturbance and play it back. All day, that's my new ringtone. And that's happening because my vocal folds destabilize so much at that point. Go away. Sorry. So at this moment where the pitch I was singing went above my first formant, or right in line with it, my resonance strategy radically altered. And when that happened, oh, sorry.
It's fine.
I'm about to show you what that is. When that happened, it destabilized the vocal folds and made them have to make a new decision, basically.
So when formants and harmonics cross, it creates this kind of crazy, unstable environment, and it's very likely it'll make the vocal folds all of a sudden kind of switch edges to thickness, just stability in general. So if this is something you desire, if you want to yodel, all you have to do is mix, kind of flip pick a high pitch vowel with a low pitch you're singing, and then as you get higher, go to a lower vowel. And that's how people yodel. It's how they encourage that unstable flip in the vocal folds.
Even the traditional yodeling is exactly based on that.
Yeah, formants and harmonics crossing. And then if you don't want that to happen, bringing those vowel shapes closer together. So instead of going I could create, modify the vowels so that they were just more similar and didn't create as drastic of a situation that would make the vocal folds want to flip.
And you can see her first formant here doesn't change, right? You still got the idea that she was singing ah-oo, so slight changes up here, you'll notice. But right here, the first formant's pretty freaking stable, which is what we do with a lot of vowel modification in the so-called passaggio, which is simply the place in the voice where there are more first formant options. And because there are more first formant options, there's more of a chance for the first formant to cross a harmonic, which will create instability. So when you're looking at that area where the first formant can migrate more, we just want to teach the voice to migrate in ways that are effective for the style we want to sing.
Yeah, and if you don't want that unstable vocal flip, find vowel options that won't encourage it.
And I just wanted to show this. This is a Voce Vista feature.
Voce
Vista feature. You may see this white line up here. That's the aggregate of the entire area that I have highlighted. So I highlighted this area, and now it's showing me over that exercise Laurel just sang, the overall volume of it peaks here, and the overall and volume of this area peaks here, that kind of thing. You can toggle that on and off. It'll be over here.
Average is the white line.
You get rid of the average spectrum, the white line goes away. It can be fun. It's mostly for research. I just saw it pop up and realized we hadn't turned it off.
And then our third thing to explore was this idea of every formant doing their job. So if I'm imitating a sound and I'm hearing, God, there's all these bright, ringing, high qualities in it, it's so tempting for me to want to try to bring those out with the shape of my throat with my first formant. And if I do that, first of all, I won't be effective, because remember that the first formant will always be lower than the second formant and lower than the upper formant. So I can never actually get it small enough and high enough to bring out those ringing qualities that I'm hearing. But that seems to be just the instinct for so many people when they are starting to sing, is to try to use the shape of the throat to bring out the high ringing qualities in the sound, which is just not going to be efficient, and also create that crunchy small space around the vocal folds, which we associate with strain and pinched tight feelings. So for example, let's see, started with, was this our first? So if I'm trying to sing this high note, I'm hearing, you know, in my models, I'm like, oh, there's all these bright ringing qualities. I want to bring that out. So I create a really small space in my throat to try to boost this information up here, because I heard it and I want to create it, but I'm using the less efficient container of air to do that with.
But I think what we think to be true psychologically is that this is the quickest go-to for most people.
Yeah.
Even though we may not understand this mathematically, it is true that the narrower the vocal tract, the higher pitch it's going to bring out.
Higher
so
frequency,
somehow, high frequency, yes, somehow our bodies realize that and narrow everything in an attempt
Narrow
to do
everything.
this.
Yeah, it's kind of like all hands on deck. But what I'd want to do, especially if I just want to sing in the aesthetic that's pleasing for Western classical singing, so I want to use my first formant, the pitch of the air in my throat, to bring out this quality, but use the pitch of the air in my mouth to bring out these qualities. And with a listening exercise, we can help someone hear that. So if you've got the person who's squeezing the throat and trying to make everything small in order to bring out the upper stuff.
But you hear that all the time in choirs.
From a choir director. Helping myself hearing this quality. This is the vowel shape I need to create with my throat. And once I've got that in my ear and that in my body, I can start to listen to this information and one more, and be like, all right, this also exists, but this is what I'm going to create with my mouth.
Oh, sorry, I'm finished. You're right.
But if that right there, that if that's what I'm hearing in the aggregate of the sound, I'm going to make everything tiny because I'm hearing that and I want to create it, versus understanding that there's also the bottom part of the sound that I can more successfully create with the throat.
And this is an example that is common to choral singing, like I said, but this exact same thing works in every style. Every pop singer I've ever worked one-on-one with overly narrows their throat, just as like, and right. I don't think it's just pop singers, it's every singer, but in that style where we typically see less first formant space and therefore higher energy peaks from the first formant, there is ample opportunity to actually lower that frequency peak and stabilize the instrument.
Right, so let's look at that in pop singing. When I do a sound we hear more in pop music, this area that we're about to dive into is key. Look how much this is boosted. This is so important. But if I try to bring out, it's 3,000 to 4,000 hertz. If I try to make my throat small enough, the pharynx, like the actual large throat, small enough to try to bring this out, I'm going to be so squeezing and tight and small, and it actually will never work. But we see this all the time. People are hearing this, and they want to narrow everything to create it. Ah! Ah!
So in all these examples, you see her first formant rising. So here she was mixing between the second and third harmonic. Here she's right on the third harmonic, it got higher, and here she got all the way up to the fourth harmonic. in an attempt to bring this out. And functionally, it actually did. We got more information here that last time because she was pressing everything, but the quality was less stable because she had to be so narrow in order to get that first formant way up there.
Right. So I can never raise my first formant. I can never make my throat small enough to bring out this quality that I'm hearing as being so key in pop singing. But there is another part of my body that can bring it out, which is in charge of what we're calling this twang region. And we'll talk about that now. So just this kind of, you know, in a sound like this, helping someone realize the different parts. That even though I'm hearing this, that really exciting ring in the sound, it doesn't mean that the shape of my throat can bring it out. The shape of my throat is going to be more responsible for bringing this part out. So just going through, and we'll talk about this a lot with Mata as well in the next course, of just how to imitate parts of the sound and then build it, which works great with these filters as well. So,
if we go back, there was one thing. Sorry. In this last exercise, we ran away from before. Notice I mentioned this a second ago with the acoustic mixing too. Notice how when Laurel, this was the exercise where she stabilized her first formant with the yodel, and so we didn't get the yodel. Notice how in that experience, she was acoustic mixing the whole time. And I think that's what we see a lot when we are in that part of the range where the first formant can migrate more often, is to find these options where we stabilize in what people call the passaggio, often results in an acoustic mix concept.
Because you don't have to go from drastic choice to drastic choice.
Exactly.
It's just always in the middle.
And there's more space between these harmonics than there is right on them. So
more choices, yeah.
And equally, there are more choices. Let me show my hands. There are more choices here than there are here or here. So when you think about, if you're in a place where you're moving around a lot and everything's changing, if you can find areas where there are more choices, you're more likely to hit a sweet spot more often.
Yeah, finding that vowel. And the vowel chart with the lines would be great for that. You just sing your pitch and then notice where the lines sit in an in-between spot and then imitate that vowel. All right, so we've set ourselves up for the final piece of the puzzle, which is twang / singer's formant cluster / inertance and how it affects that.
So singer's formant cluster is a term that Sundberg created. I'm pretty sure he was the first one to use it. I hadn't seen it before him. And it's used a lot in Western classical singing. And what Sundberg was actually saying, if you read his 1989 book, he was trying to suggest that when the fourth and fifth formants, or the third and fourth formants, get so close together that they end up boosting the same harmonics, that is actually a new formant. And
a mega
formant. And you can tease out that's all language, but that's what he's talking about, is when either the third and fourth formants combine or get so close that they end up boosting the same harmonics, or the fourth and fifth formants do that same thing.
Can we back up a sec? So we've been talking mostly about the first and second formant, and we've attributed the first one to the big container of air behind the throat, and the second one to this big container of air in front of the tongue in the mouth. When we talk about these other formants, we're just talking about other containers of air, small ones because they are boosting higher and higher frequencies that we can assign to certain body parts, and we'll talk about especially this epilarynx tube and its effect. But yeah, if it's a confusing topic, I would just think of it as, oh yeah, there's other tiny pockets of air in the vocal tract that boost higher peaks of energy besides the mouth and the throat. And we see their effect in lots of different sounds.
In fact, I would add to that that once we get to the third and above formants, we see the body part assignment idea start to break down.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to be like, that exists right at your lips. It's this relationship between all the containers of air, and then these little energy peaks appear based on the relationship between the pockets of air.
Right. And so, yeah, so that's why when we come into, we bring this twang idea in very quickly when we teach, but we just like say the twang region, and we play like Laurel just did. We filter what you can see here in the red box. We say, listen to that. That's a quality we want to bring out, etc. We'll talk about in a second. The idea of twang is not new to any of us, and it has been kind of affectionately co-opted by parts of the voice world to describe this band of energy between roughly 2,500 and 4,000 hertz, where the third, fourth, and fifth formants, and sixth even, often hang out. And so it's a specific band, whereas the singer's formant cluster is a rotating or floating moment where two or three upper formants cluster.
But still in this picture,
they're very similar what we're talking about, but just noting that difference. So we're liking twang because it relates just to this frequency band, and then whatever the formants do around it.
And it's for all styles. Singer's formant cluster is pretty male classical singing biased. In the research done on it.
So of course the unfortunate part about twang is that it relates to country music, and people often have negative associations with that.
Or positive.
Which is right, or positive if you grew up in the South like me. So what this is there's a little tiny tube. Boink. I'm going to show my face again. So there's a little tiny tube right here, just above the vocal folds, and when it can narrow and it can widen, right? This is a very simple explanation, of course. And the relationship between how narrow it is and how wide the throat is has a direct relationship on how much energy is boosted in this part of the auditory range, or these harmonics. You can't feel this tube. So when you first describe it like this and people go, they're trying to make it tiny, you can't feel it. So, we can stop that effort as soon as it starts, but we can hear it and respond to it.
And we can know that it's not the same thing as the throat. So
right.
It's not trying to make a really small, narrow pharynx, as we said. The first formant, this area will never get small enough to do what this tiny little tube we can't feel can do so easily.
And in this image, which comes from the Complete Vocal Technique people, you can see the vocal folds here. And this is the epilarynx tube. It houses the false vocal folds. The epiglottis is just above it, epilarynx, hence the name. And it's about 2 to 3 centimeters long. And you can see it in pictures. This is the throat. This is the epilarynx tube. And it really can change shape fairly radically. If you've done Estel, they talk a lot about the stuff that's in the epilarynx tube. When this area narrows in relationship to the throat, we get varying degrees of energy boost in this 2,500 to 4,000 hertz range. And to say again, what makes this range really special is that the ear canal also vibrates at that frequency, which means that when those frequencies reach the ear, they're going to get another boost. So it makes it that much more powerful in our communication process. Words that people tend to assign to this frequency range, ring, ping, focus, carry power, it creates volume without effort.
So we don't have to increase a ton of breath pressure or push or make it loud. If we can just activate that part of the sound, that's what we perceive as being loud, exciting, carrying, projecting all those words.
And just to say too, this frequency range is not valuable in all styles of singing, especially styles of singing like jazz that wants a lot of texture without a lot of extra boom to the sound, because they're using a mic, They want it real speaky and texty, and all of those harmonics are lower. So
it's a choice. Yeah,
it is a choice. Many styles value this a lot, and in fact, most jazz singers know how to bring it out when they want to. But just to say, everything's a choice. Benefits, Laurel already said, volume for free, excites the ears. This range is how we can carry over loud spaces. And the element, when we talked about those energy peaks, so in this picture, let me get my mouse back up. In this picture, we have an energy peak here around 600 hertz. We can see it there in the vocal fry. And so we see the boost of all these guys. And we have another energy peak here. And you can even see how right after this peak, we lose energy. So this fourth harmonic actually drops in energy. But the fifth one then picks back up again. So you can see that energy boost. Well, up here, we get this massive energy boost because of our twang region. And in fact, this is my third formant here. I think this is me making this sound. You can see my fourth and fifth formants are clustering. That's what makes that so energized. And so because of that, I've actually got this other boost in all of these harmonics, which is giving me a lot of ring and focus to the sound. But the other thing it's doing is each of these energy peaks are creating an aggregate energy. So with each of them, I'm building energy across the whole. And so if I didn't have this, I would have fewer points of energy increase. There'd be fewer pluses in the column, which would mean that I would depend on these lower ones to be the entirety of what creates the acoustic energy that allows me to stabilize the vocal folds.
And have power, volume,
right.
all
I'll say that in a slightly different way. So each of these energy peaks in the aggregate, the total energy they create, is helping to stabilize the vocal folds and let them do their job with greater ease. So the more of these that we have, especially if they're planned out in certain ways, the easier it is for the vocal folds to vibrate and to translate air pressure into acoustic power.
Right.
And we call that inertance. That's the fancy word for it. It's the aggregate energy of the acoustic output of the resonances that feed back to the vocal folds.
So yes, bringing out this twang region is a stylistic choice. It could be an aesthetic you're not interested in, but there is this efficiency idea that if you bring it out, it's going to help every other part of your sound boost and be louder and be more efficient, and the vocal folds won't have to work as hard. And so an advantage to this idea of twang is that this is really what support is. Yes, there's support from below, a steady stream of breath pressure, but if you don't have this acoustic support, this maximized inertance, the vocal folds will have to work way harder. And that's when people talk about that feeling of, oh, it's doing the work for me. I don't even have to, it's the song that's singing itself. This is what they're talking about. All the formants adding to each other, and carrying the sound without you having to work for it.
And before we leave that picture,
sure.
It goes to say again, this particular image on Voce Vista is of a classical singing style. Again, my fourth and fifth formants are clustered. That's Sundberg singing formant cluster, singer's formant cluster. You can see the gap between my second formant and my third formant. That's endemic of classical singing. If I were to bring out the twang region in a pop style, you would see all of my formants spread out a little more. So that's why the singer's formant cluster is really a Western classical iteration, because we wouldn't see that in pop singing in the same way. We'd want to spread the formants. We'd still want energy in that twang region, but by spreading, we're bringing out all harmonics more. So just to say, stylistic difference aside, this is still an important element.
Totally. So if you wanted to explain this to someone in a quick way, if you are going with the containers of air, the little bottles image, saying, well, okay, we've also got a really tiny bottle right above the vocal folds, and when it's focused and everything else aligns, we end up bringing out this 3,000 hertz in range, and we can hear it on the analyzer. Here it is. Listen for it. It'll help your body create it, and it's just going to make everything more efficient. That's
just doing
that's
that.
fine.
Sorry, Carol, we missed your questions.
And David mentioned this, but because of the way our ears are structured, the tube, our inner ear tube, is the exact same dimensions as this epilarynx tube, this little tube when it's focused that is right above the vocal folds. So if you create this 3000 hertz range, this twang region with your epilarynx tube, it'll then go through the ear and get brought out again. It's like we have a microphone in our ear just for this range. So it is especially exciting to us as listeners, and other instruments do not create it in the way that we do. This is why one voice can be heard over an entire orchestra without a microphone, because the voice is bringing out this range that'll carry above all the other instruments and get to people's ears in the most exciting way.
And to say, since we can't feel it, and since we know that psychologically we're much more likely to try and narrow the entire vocal tract to bring it out, even though that will never be successful, the quickest way to get the voice to do this is by filtering those frequencies and feeding them back to the ear that feeds back to the voice. And boosting them in the filter box and letting the ear get used to hearing it, and then having people sing while listening to it, etc.
Right, because talking about where it's created and the epilarynx tube next to the like, that is nothing I have a sensation of, nothing I can talk to directly. So listening is going to be the most efficient way to bring it out. So this is often confused with nasality, and they're not the same thing. I think people often feel vibrations around their nose when twang is brought out, because it's such a strong vibration that the bones start vibrating in sympathy. But nasality is created when the soft palate is down and acoustic energy goes through the nose, and now this nasal cavity is a part of our vocal tract, a part of our filter. So you can have nasality and twang. You can have just nasality and no twang, or you can have nasality and twang. Are those three options? Mm-hmm. Just twang. Here, I'm going to show my face.
Okay, go.
So you can always test if your soft palate is up or down by just plugging your nose while you make sound. So if I have a really nasal sound and then I plug my nose, I feel a blockage, I hear the sound change, I know acoustic energy was going through the nose. But if I plug my nose and there's no acoustic energy going through the nose because nothing changed when I closed and opened it. So if I can have just twang, and no nasality. I can have nasality and no twang. So not very twangy, but all the info is going through my nose. Or I can have nasality and twang. And they can combine because they're being made in different places.
Thank you, French.
Yes, totally. We've said this, but the idea of all the teaching that goes around, low larynx, create space, this is not contrary to creating epilarynx focus, because if that epilarynx tube is narrow and it doesn't get to go into an open wide throat, we actually don't end up with that boost. We just end up with small crunched feeling and not that same ring in the sound. So those ideas actually are not mutually exclusive.
And for those people who love to talk about the soft palate, this is a similar thing. You feel twang, the result of twang, the harmonic result energy around the soft palate, just like you feel nasality around the soft palate. So when the twang increases, you tend to feel a sensation there if you're looking for it. And that's what people tend to say, oh, my soft palate's lifted. What they're really saying is there's a lot of twang in the sound. And so you're feeling that energy. So again, you can't show the soft palate lifted. Well, I guess you can show nasality, but on the analyzer, but you can show twang because that's a direct result of those harmonic energy. I feel like I'll at least got to skip through this fast. This is just a really cool image called an inertogram that comes from Ingo Tietze and Kitty Vitellini's book. And what it's showing is this area over here is breath pressure. This is the trachea.
It's like if someone was laying down on their back.
And so this is the epilarynx tube. This is the mouth and throat together. This is the lips. This is the epilarynx tube narrowed. And this is the addition of a straw. That's what we're looking at here. And over here is the acoustic result. So when we have just the epilarynx tube rather wide, we get just a peak here in that twang region. We add the mouth and the throat, we start to see our first formant boost, our second formant boost, and that twang region actually goes down a little bit.
So this would be like no twang and a wide open mouth. This
is if we add lips, like an ooh. Notice how the first formant drops. Here's our second formant boost, but it also increases in energy. And notice how then our upper formants start to separate because we've added that. We see this often. Now we narrow the epilarynx tube. This is one of the coolest things about this diagram, is that when the epilarynx tube is narrowed, look at the boost that everything gets. Massive compared to before. So that's our proof that this is important. And then Ingo loves to use this to talk about the straw, which we're about to. When you lengthen the vocal tract and narrow the opening, look at the amazing boost that you get otherwise as well. So epilarynx and the straw helps. This is even more epilarynx narrowing. So when we use an SOVT like a straw, we actually get more epilarynx narrowing, which gives us more of the boost as well. So
while keeping it open throat. Yeah.
So it's a fun diagram if you want to play with it. It's in their book.
One more thought on that on this slide. Okay, I think I just wanted to say that, so by adding a straw and then along with that epilarynx narrowing, we're increasing inertance or acoustic support. And the whole point is that the vocal folds will vibrate easier and that formants that already were boosting the sound will boost even more. So we're just getting more of all the things we want.
Each of those energy peaks is adding more pluses to the column that's helping the vocal folds vibrate more easily, which is helping the vocal folds turn air pressure or airflow into acoustic energy more efficiently.
And one more thought on the soft palate is that we see with these kind of diagrams and research that it's the relationship of all these parts that creates the overall vocal tract shape that brings out ring. Oh, that sounded supported. Oh, yeah, that's the harmonic quality I want. Oh yeah, it's a lifted supported sound. All these language things we can put on top of it. It's not about one single body part. The soft palate lifting on its own doesn't create this. It's the relationship of all of them together. And that was what we talked about in our first session, that the old way of thinking is very centered on one body part, diaphragm, soft palate. Use those things and all your problems are solved, versus thinking of the relationship between all of the vocal tract with the harmonics. That's what ends up with a sound that's lined up or supported, all those words we use. So because we've got this, our last diagram has this extra part, which is this long, narrow tube to represent a straw. We're going to finish our session talking about straw phonation, or SOVTs. Actually, I'm going to keep small so you can look at our straws. So SOVT stands for semi-occluded vocal tract. Oh, and also, yeah, Jim, I see your question, and let's look at those at the end for sure, all those different examples. So semi-occluded just means partially closed. So some kind of exercise making sound where the mouth is partially closed, or somehow we've narrowed the opening for where the sound escapes. Over here. So we know that whatever the vocal tract is doing is feeding the vocal folds. There's all that acoustic pressure is inside the vocal tract, feeding back, and it can either boost what the vocal folds are doing or get in the way. And we saw that with our examples of the that we did in that second session. So we know that that's already happening. There's acoustic support. You're lining up the vocal tract with a certain vowel shape that's either helping the vocal folds or not. Well, when we narrow our opening and make it longer, like when we add a straw, so now my vocal tract starts here, goes all the way up, 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 and ends way down here with this really narrow opening that is the straw. I am maximizing that acoustic back pressure, or that inertance, as we just talked about. So if the vocal folds were opening, that trapped acoustic pressure will help them open even more. If they were closing in their vibration, that acoustic back pressure will help them close even more. And an easy way that I explain this to students without getting into these diagrams is just that when we do straw phonation or other SOVTs, it's like we're doing stretches in the pool. So we're still getting to stretch and do our exercises, but it's just so much less work. It's way less impact than if you were running on the pavement versus in a pool. It's more back pressure also means that we can find that middle position in the vocal folds so much easier. So if you've got the situation of going from with a straw, that extra back pressure can help you find this middle ground for the vocal folds themselves.
Because if you remember back to the first session, anywhere in the middle is not as primal to our experience. We're more likely to lock with a harmonic in the first formant. So to find something that needs to be a little more trained, extra acoustic back pressure is going to make the vocal folds work more efficiently, thereby finding new things easier.
So if you have one on you, you're welcome to do some straw phonation with us. The size is pretty personal because so the longer it is, the more back pressure you'll get, and the more narrow the opening, the more back pressure. So this is our Voice Science Work straw, and this one also we got our logo on, but then we went against plastics. These are paper, and that can feel good on your earthly conscience. Yeah. So yeah, we've got different size diameter openings. So this would be more back pressure. This would be less. And then of course there's also like coffee stirrers or cocktail straws. And like I like to link them together lengthwise. I can do it. So it would be like this. And that's going to be so super narrow opening, super long, getting even more back pressure that way. The other option is cup phonation.
You just poke a hole in a paper cup, and then you get to move your mouth as well. And if you can play with these, take all the different straws and put them into the analyzer, and you'll notice how it affects the height of or the pitch of your formants. They'll all get lower. So you'll notice different lowerings and where the intensity is. So that's another benefit of the SOVTs is that because it lowers the formants, it changes the places where those migrating first formants happen, which makes it, you can train those crosses and manipulations in a lower part of the range where the trade-off is easier.
So for the cup phonation, yeah, I can have the singer poke the hole, which will be fun, and then just be sure it seals around the mouth. La 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 la. La, 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 la. And I can move my articulators, I can sing all the words. And once again, I've lengthened the vocal tract. It's now this long. And I narrowed the opening with my tiny hole. So we're getting the same result. And for people who sometimes like clench and get really tight at first, this can be a great entryway. Another wonderful use of the cup. With ensembles, you have the cup up, there's less amplitude escaping. So it's a great way to learn. If you've got some people who know the part and some people who don't. It's also with one-on-one if you're doing a lot of listening. So let's say we want to increase their attention to the twang region, put headphones on, filter the twang region out, boost it, put a cup on their mouth. Now they can't even hear themselves in the same way, but they are singing. So and they're getting that. And they're getting the acoustic back pressure at the same time, which is helping to increase the likelihood that they'll get that twang. So if you don't have a straw on you, these are all of these are SOVTs. They're all somehow narrowing the opening and maximizing that inertance and back pressure, helping the vocal folds. So the cup, we said, lip trills, tongue trills, nasal consonants. Think about it. If I'm sending sound through my nose, what kind of opening do I have? A super small one, right? My nostrils are a much narrower opening, so I'm going to get way more back pressure. And there was a question from Angie about if the straw or cup helps to encourage the epilarynx to narrow. And yet it's the same kind of thing as what we're talking about with using the ear to encourage the epilarynx to focus, is that when one thing is happening and it's helping the mechanism, it will continue to happen more. So we're creating acoustic back pressure with the straw or the cup, which is increasing inertance, and therefore the body says, oh yeah, I like that. So it uses the epilarynx to increase inertance further because you're getting lots of pluses in the column, so your body keeps adding them.
Yeah, it's an additive kind of thing. If it's working, it'll do it more.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. Although I think with all these SOVTs, listening is really key. And sometimes I have to take someone off the straw for a second and be like, okay, I just want you to listen to the quality. We're not going, right? I mean, that's no epilarynx narrowing at all. So listen, I'm really just listening for that E in the sound, that puppy whine. Sometimes getting someone into that space because you're not getting as much oral feedback, checking in and just like, yeah, how are we using the straw can be key. But yes, in the best circumstance, it should. And then these other consonants as well, all of those will have the same effect. So our last wrap up, and then we'll do questions, and Jim, I'd love to explore those sounds on the analyzer if you have time. We hope to stay connected with everyone. PAVA is one of our favorite conferences. They're going to be in Chile next year, but there's tons of different things, and on our website you can find lots of ways to connect with community of people who are sharing these ideas and exploring. And we're excited to just see what other questions this leads, because this is all really brand new information. And it all came about from a process of asking questions. And so we can, even as we gain more information, not forget that process. I think that's the most exciting part about all of it. And yeah, we would love to see you all in November. The dates are going to be November 1st, 8th, and 15th for a 3-week tech dive, diving into 3 more technologies to play with the voice. And yes, we hope to be in touch. Our last little thought is that to be a scientist, not a tourist in your vocal experience, and that all of your discoveries count with this information. Like this conversation needs more voices in it. And it's such a brand new field, and it's in a really exciting time that we need your voices as well. So please keep in touch with us with your questions and your thoughts and curiosities and discoveries. And yes, we hope to all have this community now through this online platform.
And thank you all for being a part of this with us. And now if anybody wants to chat some more, unmute and let's go.
Gemma, do you want to talk through those sounds that you had listed in the chat box?
Yeah, I suppose it's just always coming up, and it's just an issue of terminology. But I would just maybe like you to explain that to me again, the difference between getting somebody to tilt, add more stretch to the sound with that cry, or am I just getting into boosting the ring? What's up there? Would you mind running through that again?
Let's see if it'll work through our speakers. Would you maybe just demo your interpretation of a couple of those words, and we'll see what they look like?
Okay.
What does tilt mean to you? What does cry mean?
Yeah. No, 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 no. Which to me is like a cried, like I feel like there's a bit of sob or cry in there, or that something's tilting, that there's a bit of in there.
Will you do that thing you just did?
Yeah.
So I need to move us over here. Yeah, so there was your actual cry, and then we see the results of it over here. So looking for similarities, we clearly have a bifurcation of your upper formants. So we see the result of probably I'm guessing it's either your third or your fourth formant. And then will you vocal fry that same I just That's so lovely, Gemma.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so I was my first thought was actually a little more accurate. I think your third formant is lower, and we're looking
it's not totally important.
Yeah, it's not totally important. Anyway, we see a spread here of these upper formants, which is what we look for in pop singing, right? And that gives you a big range of energy here. There's not much of a gap here. Right? And when you did your no, there actually a gap started to create a little bit because you're using O and your second formant was dropping.
So I think that technique, is really just used to bring out this part of the sound. Like, let's just listen to that, this twang region. That's that exciting ring. And because someone is, because we're using an instruction that isn't, that doesn't feel like singing, I just think it's a way to get people to do it easily and instinctually. Because like when I'm whining or crying, I don't have to work hard. I'm not going to be like, no, 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 to make it. So I think that would be my guess of why that instruction is used and why it works. But I think acoustically, it really is about just efficiency. We're bringing out the ring in the sound, the parts that excites the ears, without pressing, squeezing, and working really hard.
And
so is there any like, you know, when they talk about tilt in a still, this thing of the vocal folds having, you're able to keep the bulk with some extra stretch with this idea of that sound. So I'm able to stay more in the middle here, but I'm also getting a bit more of a stretch so it doesn't sound as strained. Like that was kind of my idea of what was going on physiologically. Then with the ring on top, then now I can see that.
Yeah, I would guess that is what they're after, that it's that you get that middle place in the vocal folds. It's not or and because you're also getting this twang focus, it just helps everything be stable.
I'm going to take it a step further because first of all, going for those who haven't looked at Estel, the idea of tilt, this is the cricoid cartilage, and the thyroid cartilage sits on top of it. And their research from the 70s shows that when the cricothyroid muscle contracts, both kind of do a tilt thing. And the thyroid cartilage glides and tilts, but the cricoid cartilage can shift a little bit too. That's kind of under question as to how much that affects.
And they're also really into this like downward tilt.
Yeah, they love this idea. And my take on all of that conversation is it's a little too mechanics micromanagey to be effective from my experience. And I think that tends to be the criticism that Estelle gets in as a community, is that it's so micromanaging on the muscles that we can overly kind of manage.
But it's relating to a sound. Like I don't think no one in Estel says tilt without demoing tilt. No, it's more tilt, right? They're using it and pairing it with a sound. So I think it's just become a way to describe a sonic quality.
So what Laura was saying, if we take that to the sonic quality and we look at the output of it, the fact that your formants are spreading here is an important element because of the vowel shape you are choosing, which was also important for this exercise. So because your vowel shape, you are bringing your second formant really low. O brings the first and second formants close to each other and lower than ah, right? So that allows you, if you look here, to actually go from a place of acoustic mix through a place of hey and back to a place of acoustic mix. Because you kept your first formant pretty stable. And one way you were able to do that was by lowering both the second and the third formant. I'm seeing that result now from both your vocal fry, and we see it here. So you can see the result of first formant here, second formant actually is down here too, and then your third is coming down over them. So that's bringing all of your energy peaks of those first three really low, which is increasing energy to the vocal folds. And then by spreading out your upper formants, we're increasing energy across the whole, which is what we want in pop singing. So with this one exercise, with the whine, as Laura was saying, you're able to start to work this area. And with the O, you're able to do what a Western classical singing does all the time too, which is to stabilize the first formant by bringing energy from the second and third formants low enough to help create the acoustic back pressure we want. So you're getting benefits in a lot of different ways. And I find that so much more interesting than the idea of, well, I've got more CT engaged.
Yeah, but you also wouldn't give that explanation in a lesson. I mean, I think
I might if somebody really got into it. But usually, say do the wine thing, and and then I'd go and like Laurel did, I would filter certain elements and feed them back. If they weren't like Gemma skilled at this stabilization process, I might come at that in several different ways.
And then what would be called the twang register, which obviously makes no sense, but some people would call that like a voice quality. Would be when you're higher, obviously above the transition. So if you're like, then that's more associated, and you can see I'm twanging loads there in comparison to when I'm quite TA dominant. So I'm doing and I suppose.
Yeah, you changed the vowel shape, which had an impact. But look at all of them have that same area.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Boosted, and they do slightly different things because you changed the vowel shape. To me, the biggest difference was this. In the first one, you were more in a whoop posture. The first form, it was quite lower. And the second one, you're way up here. So you said TA dominant, and that goes right along with what we expect. If you're boosting the third harmonic with the first formant, you're going to see more muscle mass. If you're boosting the first harmonic with the first formant, you're going to see less muscle mass. But you were able to, with that whine, because of the boost here, notice we still have energy across the harmonics, where if you just whooped, we would have lost all that.
Right.
So this is what I referred to earlier as the power pigeon. It's kind of been the inverse. Because of all this twang, you're able to be in a less muscle mass posture and still have lots of carry power. So you went against what the body would normally do. And to do that, you had to pick a sound that allowed that to happen in that range where you're going to have less muscle mass in contact.
Cool.
Thanks,
Any
guys.
thoughts, Andrew Carell?
I just had a question. Well, here's a tech question. In the emails you sent with the videos from previous classes, if I save those emails, how are those in perpetuity, or how do those stay for a certain amount of time to review?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we'll leave them up at least 2 more months, and then if you need them after that, just let us know.
Okay, so they're not like, it's not a download, it's a streaming thing.
Yeah, they're on YouTube. They're just unlisted. So if you have the link, you can get to them.
Okay, thanks. And then once when I was doing a tune with like not a lyric, but just like a little falsetto-ish melody in the middle, someone helped me get it stable by saying tilt my head, which I'm sure she was like an Estelle woman. Is that simply because I just made the cavity longer, my first formant therefore lowered? Because by tilting your head, you're making your pharynx longer.
I could. There are lots of adjustments this is going to do, and that idea of tilting forward is fairly.
Well, it's not the CT tilt, I know, but I mean.
Right. Probably. I'm just guessing. The biggest influence was probably on these strap muscles.
Yeah. So maybe you just stabilized the larynx position, and maybe what you're saying, it maybe changed the shape of the vocal tract a little bit, so you change the formants. Have you had to do that since then?
Well, it seems to work on that one passage, and I'll give her credit, even though it's someone I mentioned to you guys in an email, and almost 80% of what this person said I found to be, dubious. But this, it worked when she actually said, "Hey, sing me something," So I'll give her credit for that.
I would say those kind of mechanical adjustments that we talked about can have immediate and strong impact. Like, for example, those strap muscles, again, do have direct influence over how the vocal folds respond because they're so close to the larynx. Yeah, and the shape of the vocal. They're really important for our sound. So if we're doing this and really pulling on them and the ones in the back and stuff like that, that's going to impact our sound. So if all of a sudden we do this, that's going to impact our sound too. The question, and sometimes that kind of mechanical adjustment is necessary or can be helpful in teaching the body, hey, there's another way to do this. It can also, my experience is long-term, if we keep coming back to that, hey, remember this thing that you did, it can have diminishing results because the body will figure out how to tense those muscles again, even if you're not sticking your chin out. So it's kind of a immediate transition value. And then I would go again, what's it doing sonically? Can we use that sonic information to train the body differently?
Right.
even like looking in a mirror and changing your mouth shape can be cool, but it can also have diminishing results because then you're obsessing about your mouth shape rather than using your ears.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. And the same person speaking about just a different part of our discussion, you know, when they were into breathing, and I know that obviously a full rib cage is a full rib cage. It's goes in all directions, but people like the term back breathing because they just haven't had proprioception back there, I guess. But they liked, this person was using the image of sing as if the audience was behind you, and it just got people to focus slightly differently on how they were projecting, and it actually made, when the people in the class were, you know, not novice but mid-level experienced singers, and it did actually have a pleasing effect on their voice when they visualized differently. What is there anything going on there?
No, I've seen people have effect with that. I think I almost would imagine it's just like using a different part of the brain. So it's one of those opposite things. So when we think about opposites, so, you know, kneel down as you go up in your pitch. You're singing this way, but imagine it's going this way. You're engaging imagination, and so I think it just opens you up to a new experience. So all of a sudden you're not micromanaging with your judgment brain. Maybe you're listening in a new way. Maybe you're just allowing yourself to do something different because you've kind of tricked your brain. That's kind of my perspective on all those, like, you know, visualization tricks, which are great. So yeah, I don't know if there's any other like proof that if you think that your sound will automatically XYZ, but I think it's just a great changing our perspective. And like I like to have people do this where they move their hands as they're singing and keep both fingers in their peripheral vision, and that can totally expand the way they're listening or just sensing themselves in the room. All those things have that great value.
And again, because like the brain is the most important organ in this whole process, so as often as we can get our processing to adjust, and as you mentioned, proprioceptive awareness, as often as we can be aware in different ways, whether it's physical sensation or imagination or sound or all of it, the less likely we are to get stuck in certain negative loops that have diminishing results. This is the thing with, you know, like the mouth shape in the mirror. Use it, but then use something else too, because if we get stuck there, now we're stuck again. The goal with the brain is to keep that flow of novel information coming in, because there's always so much. If we get stuck on one thing, we've limited our great capacity.
Yeah.
As far as head, chest, and mix, voice being completely archaic, but they're still prevalent probably. I have a couple young kids who are in a rock band who didn't even realize they had a head voice until I had them, you know, call someone for their dropped car keys across the parking lot, and you're like, holy cow, I can sing a high G. You know, that thing. So like, are you cool? I mean, the answer is up to me, I know, but like, would you be approving for them? Like head, chest, and mix is definitely like, I don't want to go past that, even if it's not accurate, because it works. Like they're discovering you'd be intellectually fine with that, right?
And if we're not, no.
I mean, I'm doing it.
Revoke your license.
At some level, your language choices are your language choices. Our challenge to ourselves and to the world is to ask questions of how that language is serving you, and whether how that language can serve long term. So even in our discussion, the bottles of air is an entryway into this discussion of formants. That ultimately keeps riding out into energy peaks and inertance and onward. So if you can kind of puzzle out an entryway term that's going to help them go further, my challenge, or for me with metaphoric language like head and chest, is that it has diminishing results. It's hard to get there from here. And so, you know, what other way might you describe those sensations that would be just as direct, and also be able to transfer into new knowledge as they learn? Because you don't know that these aren't going to be, you know, people who are very influential pedagogues 20 years from now.
I mean, that's whatever. I think too much pressure. Yeah. But I got most interested in finding new language when I started singing like new contemporary classical music that asked for so many different colors. So, and even in rock, it's like when someone goes, ah! Like, is that head? Is that chest? Like, I'm going, I'm making all the different sounds the voice can make, and especially in genres that are demanding for that and it's exciting, 3 categories no longer fit the bill.
Mm-hmm.
Especially 3 categories that aren't connected in any way to our senses, the sound we're making, etc. I mean, you have to really work to apply those to what you're seeing and what you're hearing. So, finding, even if you just, showed them on the analyzer, that woo, and they go, wow, and you say, what do you see different from when you say, hey, they've got way more information in that 3 minutes, and you gave them no more confusing language, and they've still got, that's that low one, that's that high one. They've still got 2 different things to differentiate, and they can build into that. So as we are in a time right now where people still very much rely on ancient language, traditional language, our challenge to everyone is, can you say it in a different way that is more meaningful to you and allows you to build on it? And if so, do it and see what happens, and challenge yourself to explore.
Yeah, I mean, I've been giving them conscious thought into what vowels I assign them.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, I'm not, I'm not checked out or anything.
Yeah.
But for them, like the concept of having a head voice, or whatever you want to call it, is just so new that they were able to be like, put a name on something that they can access.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and language is not, if it works for them, then that is checking the most important box. But then the next box might be, could something else also work, and then also allow them to broaden beyond a fixed category. Yeah.
And I might say this too, as you mentioned, the sensation, the experience was so novel. When they went, woo, and they said, oh my God, I never knew I could do that. At that moment, you had the choice. What were you going to help them tie that experience to in their memory? And you chose a word. And that word is now a huge part of their memory because it relates to that radical experience. That word could have been anything, and you chose one word. Why did you choose that word over another? And are there other ones that the next time that happens with somebody, you could choose a different one, and why? That's really the interesting question to me. And we change our terms, regularly enough when we see that what we're using isn't allowing us to move forward. I mean, we started studying inertance a year and a half ago or so because we ran into this idea of locations of formants being too limiting because it's not the whole picture, and we wanted to dig into it more. Inertance is incredibly complex and weird, but it helped us move a step further and have new language, and that's what we're always trying to do.
Yeah, and I think always we don't, as the teachers, like, we don't have to have the answers. Like, you can always ask the person who's having the experience, like, okay, that thing, what are we going to call it? Like, I always ask, I say, in 2 weeks from now, what word will help you recall this memory? What will help you get into this space in this room again? And maybe it is head voice, maybe it is hootie, maybe it is whatever, but yeah, I'd say, yeah, we can talk about language a lot, but ultimately it is about what will help the person recall that experience, and is it a word that opens them up and helps them actually hear everything that's going on, or is it something that's going to narrow them and think they only have a few options?
And helping them ask interesting questions too. I mean, that's an ultimate goal. Because if they're asking interesting questions, they're doing their job, and you don't have to do it for them.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know I have a client, and I know you guys have to run, but is undervowel and overvowel? I've never heard that before. I super love it. Is it undervowel always the pharynx and overvowel always the mouth? That's a really cool way of putting it.
Yeah, that's totally a way to think of it. Yeah.
Awesome.
And you can read more about that in Ken's kinesthetic voice.
Kinesthetic vocal pedagogy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
The second book.
His second book. And he talks about it a lot.
It's a short read too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's, it's a language that, again, he and a lot of people find very valuable.
Vowelable.
Anybody else?
Any other thoughts? Cool. All right. So good to see you all. Yeah. We got our UK Irish bout.
Catherine, I'm super jealous that you're in the Bennett archive. Beckett. Sorry. I'm a huge Beckett fan, so we can't hear you.
Can you unmute?
She's not muted. Her microphone's just not working.
Oh no. You'll have to type us.
Anyway, type us later. Yeah, we'll talk about it.
All right, we shall stop there.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
Cool. All right. Bye.